great general has said that the only good Indian is a dead one, and that high sanction of his destruction has been an enormous factor in promoting Indian massacres. In a sense, I agree with the sentiment, but only in this, that all the Indian there is in the race should be dead. Kill the Indian in him and save the man. Richard Henry Pratt.
In the late 1880s to the early 1920s, the United States government had a responsibility to protect the differences of Native Americans. They were forced into boarding schools and assimilated into white culture. The right to express religion, language, and culture was not being given to Native Americans. They had the right to embrace their differences and to not suffocate under the ways of the government. No right was given and no responsibility was enforced. The Native Americans should have been entitled to freedom to express who they are.
When the first explorers arrived, there were many clashes between them and the Native Americans. It finally narrowed down to white settlers encroaching on the Indians' territory. Around 1830, Andrew Jackson passed the law of the Indian Removal Act. This gave him the right to negotiate with Native Americans in hopes of removing them from their homelands to make their land federal territory. Following this, the U.S. Army pushed Indian tribes off of their homelands. This is known as the Trail of Tears, which was the forced relocation of Native Americans. Many white settlers believed that they had a duty to take land and expand westward because it was God's blessing. Many tribes were taken off lands and placed upon reservations. Native people were seen as only heathen and savage, believed to be a big problem for civilizing. White settlers concluded that the only way to solve the Indian problem was by absorption. They wanted them to adopt white ways. In 1887, the Dawes Act authorized the president to divide up land into parcels for individual Indians. At the time, many treaties and negotiations were being broken. For example, the Fort Laramie Treaty of 1851 was one that called for peace. Indians were given hunting rights and ownership of certain lands. This treaty didn't last long, for the rights were no longer being given and injustice washed upon the natives, and so it was broken in the year of 1884. When it was broken, it led to killing between the warriors and soldiers. From 1825 to 1892, in Nebraska, there were over 18 different treaties, and most were turned into broken promises. Eventually, whites believed that it was less expensive to assimilate than kill all the Indians. Carl Schurz, the Commissioner of Indian Affairs, did research of that. Killing an Indian in warfare was estimated to be about $1 million, and to educate would be approximately $1,200. It was cheaper to rip away their culture and replace it with white ways than massacre all natives. All of these things led to the assimilation of the Indian through boarding schools.
An Army officer, Richard Henry Pratt, was a man who believed that educating Native Americans to reject their tribal culture and adopt white ways would be a good experiment. On November 1st, in the year of 1879, he founded the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. This was the first of many non-reservation boarding schools for Native Americans. Due to Indians being heathen and savage, he felt that taking Indian children far away from their families for long periods of time would cause them to turn away from their culture and learn to live like the white people. Pratt extended himself to different Indian reservations and asked them to send their children to his boarding school. Many natives did not support his idea and believed it wasn't right. Pratt concluded that if the Indian children were to seek education in white ways, there would no longer be conflict between them and white settlers. Although some chiefs supported sending their children, they believed it was the only way.
As soon as the Indian children arrived at Carlisle, their clothes were burned and they were given uniforms. This symbolized the burning of their old lives. They were forbidden to speak tribal language and expected to learn English. If one were to be caught speaking native tongue, they would often face severe punishments. Children were not allowed contact with their families, and many never were able to see them again. They were expected to pray and believe in God, even if they once did not. Furthermore, they were required to practice Christianity. They were being taught that their own native religion was nothing but superstitions. At Carlisle, half the day was spent for academic training, and the other half for industrial training. The boys were expected to learn carpentry, blacksmithing, and tinsmithing. The girls were required to sew, cook, clean, and learn any other woman white ways. Some boarding schools forced young children to drink coffee with sugar and eat white bread. Many times the young natives became so severely homesick it could lead to death. Along with this, they were forced to get haircuts.
Long hair was the pride of all Indians. The boys, one by one, would break down and cry when they saw their braids thrown on the floor. All the buckskin clothes had to go, and we had to put on the clothes of the white man. If we thought the days were bad, the nights were much worse. This is when the loneliness set in, for it was when we knew that we were all alone. Lone Wolf of the Blackfoot tribe.
I'm 75. I went to residential school in Muskogee in 1941 to 1949. And I had a very, very rough life. I was mistreated in every way. As a young girl, she was 7-year-old. She was pregnant. And what they did, she had her baby. They took the baby, wrapped it up in a nice pink outfit, took it downstairs. I was in the kitchen with the nun for cooking supper. They took the baby into the, where they make a fire and all that to heat up the school furnace room. They threw that little baby in there and burnt it alive. All you could hear was, that was it. And you could smell the flesh cooking. It's a big mistake when people say we were treated good. No way. There's a lot of things that happen in those boardings.
Pratt felt that his idea of killing the Indian and saving the man was succeeding, but was oblivious to the fact that he was stealing the right for Indians to have their own ways. Yet despite his cruel structure, many whites believed that boarding schools were the possible solution to the Indian problem. Not soon after, many boarding schools started to open with Carlisle as their motto. You'd think with all those children there'd be noise and laughing, but so many of us were being abused and simply didn't talk. We were too frightened. It was like a horror movie in which people walk by each other but can't communicate. Howard Wana, a boarding school survivor. Indian children had a right to grow up within their own tribes and experience their own culture. Their childhood was ripped away from reach, and being forced to join boarding schools against their will, many Native children did not see their families again until many years later. If they did return home later on, they were often caught between two cultures, not being accepted by white society or the Native society. Time drew on, and the Indian ways were slowly fading from the children. They were learning to be shameful of who their own people once were. Yet U.S. government should have fulfilled responsibility of protecting the Native Americans' culture. Instead, they were the ones who were looking to assimilate the Indian. Natives should have had freedom to express who they are through religion, tongue, and culture. It's a right all should be given.
Finally, as the years dragged on, the philosophy of kill the Indian and save the man began to tarnish. Yet what whites didn't realize is that they unintentionally drew many tribes closer together to work as one. For example, a group of 15 former boarding school students founded the Society of American Indians. This being the first national Native American political organization, they put in effort to help pass the Indian Citizenship Act of 1924. With time passing, more Native American organizations demanded better rights and an attitude adjustment within Americans. It was a change of attitude, government reports, and a stir of Indian self-determination that led to the closure of many boarding schools.
This present day, Native Americans still fight for the right to be treated as full-fledged American citizens. The U.S. government is working to take on the responsibility to help them restore who they once were. Indians still work to preserve their history. There are over 500 different tribes that are still alive with over 200 different languages. Natives still struggle for political and economical equality. Indian reservation schools grapple to gain local control of their own schools. Many natives fight to claim back their ancestors' remains from museums. They deserve ownership of tribal culture patrimony. Today still, American Indians resist doctrine of discovery. They are their own people, and they haven't stopped fighting for that right. The U.S. government allows Indian schools to teach own curriculum alongside speaking their own language. Natives are working to take back pride in the Indian ways. Yet these schools must still follow federal government rules and regulations, and many teachers contain lower salaries than most public school teachers.
Will natives ever regain full composure of who they are? Will their rights ever be graciously restored? Well, it's something no one may ever know. Not unless the U.S. government acknowledges what was done wrong and works together with the Native Americans to restore their culture. You can't change the past, but you can go somewhere with the future.